You remember your life, don't you? Where you were born, your childhood bedroom, that fight with your father, the way your first heartbreak carved a hole in your chest like a god had scooped you out with a celestial spoon. You remember the choices you made, the person you've become. You remember who you are. But what if you don't? What if memory is not a recording, but a weapon? A carefully edited fiction crafted to protect your illusion of control. What if your identity, that thing you point to and say, "This is me," is nothing but a collage of stories you've told yourself, stitched together with shame, survival, and borrowed language? Nietzsche once wrote, "Every philosophy is the confession of its author." He knew something that most of us spend our lives avoiding, that the self is not discovered, it is constructed, and poorly at that. And nowhere is this more visible than in the subconscious mind, that vast and shadowy landscape where your true nature, raw, impulsive, primal, lurks beneath the polished surface of who you think you are. The mind lies, not maliciously, not with intent, but constantly. It edits, it deletes, it reshapes, it performs hua. And the conscious mind, the little sliver of awareness you mistake for your entire being, sits like a monarch on a crumbling throne, unaware that it rules nothing, commands nothing, decides nothing. It is not the author of your life, but its post-event narrator, clumsily explaining choices made elsewhere by something older and darker and far less interested in virtue. Ask yourself this. Have you ever done something you didn't understand, snapped at someone you loved, lied when there was no reason to lie, betrayed a value you claimed to hold dear, and afterward, you rationalized? I was tired. They pushed me. I didn't mean it. But somewhere in your gut, you knew better. You knew something moved through you, something that didn't ask for permission. Nietzsche would not be surprised. He saw consciousness not as the master of the psyche, but as a thin veneer of civility over a churning ocean of impulse, drives, and instincts. What he called the will to power. He didn't believe in a singular I. He saw the self as a battlefield, 100 voices screaming, none of them sovereign. There is no being behind the doing, he wrote. The doer is merely a fiction added to the deed. In other words, you do not act because you are someone. You are someone because you acted, and then wrote a story to make sense of it. That story is what you call identity. And it is a lie because it must be. Because if you glimpsed the truth all at once, it would shatter you. You were not born with a self. You were born with a body, a bundle of nervous reactions, appetites, inherited fears. The you that exists today is a survival mechanism dressed in personality. Your memory is a patchwork of emotional edits. You remember what serves the narrative. You forget what doesn't. You demonize or romanticize what you can't control. Nietzsche understood this long before modern psychology did. Long before Freud popularized the subconscious, Nietzsche was whispering that the real danger isn't what lies in the depths. It's that we mistake the surface for the whole. And yet, you live by that surface. You defend it. You protect the mask like it's your face. But there's a price for forgetting who you really are. The subconscious does not die when you ignore it. It doesn't even sleep. It waits. It festers. It plots its return in your compulsions, your dreams, your breakdowns. Every time you say, "Boy, I don't know why I did that," it's speaking. This is not a metaphor. There is something into you, older than your name, older than language, that is still alive. And it doesn't care who you think you are. That's where we begin. Because if memory is a myth and identity is a lie, then the only question worth asking is, who or what is really living your life? Who is the self that looks out through your eyes? The one who says, "I want, I believe, I am." The voice in your head that speaks as though it is singular, unified, and in control. Nietzsche would have laughed bitterly, mockingly at this illusion. Not because it's false in a way that's merely incorrect, but because it's false in a way that's dangerous, in a way that enslaves. The concept of a coherent, stable self, the enduring I that persists through time, is, for Nietzsche, one of the most poisonous fictions in Western thought, a metaphysical relic, a ghost conjured by language and morality, something we invented so we could feel safe in a world that never cared whether we existed or not. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche demolishes the idea that there is a thinker behind the thought, an agent behind the action. He calls this the grammatical fiction, a trick of language that turns verbs into subjects. We say or think, as if thought requires an I to precede it, as if consciousness is the source rather than the symptom. He writes, a thought comes when it wishes and not when I wish. So it is a falsification of the facts to say, the subject I is the condition of the predicate think. Do you feel the ground shifting? This isn't mere semantics. Nietzsche is exposing a trap that modern minds still fall into. The moment we speak of a self, we imply a kind of ownership, a continuity, a center. But what if the center doesn't hold? What if there never was one? In The Gay Science, he describes the self not as a single being, but as a swarm, a constellation of impulses, instincts, and drives, temporarily arranged into something that only appears coherent, like a crowd chanting in unison, not because they share one voice, but because they've been shaped by the same rhythm. What we call the self is just this moment's compromise between conflicting forces. This is why Nietzsche so fiercely critiques morality, especially the moral language of guilt and responsibility. The belief in a self that chooses freely, that could have done otherwise, is the foundation of blame. But if the self is merely a name for whichever drive happens to win in any given instant, then how can we speak of guilt at all? Guilt is predicated on agency. Nietzsche strips it away. And what replaces it? The terrifying possibility that you are not a captain steering a ship, but a ship that builds its captain from whatever wind happens to blow. Nietzsche does not offer comfort. He offers clarity. And clarity, when it concerns the self, is not soft light. It is fire. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he writes, behind your thoughts and feelings, my brother, there stands a mighty ruler, an unknown sage, whose name is self. In your body he dwells. He is your body. But don't be fooled. This is not the self you've been taught to believe in. It is not your conscious preferences or personal narrative. It is your body, not just in the physical sense, but in the sense of your instincts, your buried hungers, your ancient fears. The real self is not an idea. It is a force. You are not who you think you are. You are who your instincts allow you to be in a moment under pressure. Consider this. What if your most cherished values, the things you proudly associate with your identity, are not authentically yours? What if they are inherited reflexes, OCCs, social contingents, masks for deeper impulses? Nietzsche warned against becoming a mouthpiece for inherited morality, especially the slave morality of guilt, meekness, and self-denial. He saw the self as something that could be either forged or faked, and most people fake it. They live second-hand lives, borrowed convictions, pre-packaged desires. They confuse obedience with authenticity. That's why he admired the artist, the philosopher, the overman. Not because they are born different, but because they are willing to kill the false self, to disassemble the illusion and reconstruct something truer from the rubble. The I that narrates your life is a latecomer. It arrived long after the story began. And it is not the author. It is the spin doctor. It doesn't know what you are. It only knows what you can admit to yourself without breaking down. But that is not enough. Not for Nietzsche and not for you. If you want to touch the real self, you must be willing to let the fake one die. And that is not an act of reflection. It is an act of war. You want to know what lies beneath the mask? Not the polite, well-spoken self. Not the one that knows what to say in interviews, in therapy, or on first dates. No, deeper than that, far deeper, is the thing that pulsates in balance. The thing that wants. Not the want you admit to, but the primal, wordless hunger that precedes your thoughts and survives your denials. Nietzsche gave it a name: will to power. It is not a desire for power in the political sense. It is not the cartoonish will to dominate others. It is older, broader, more fundamental. It is the basic force of life, what every living thing exerts simply by existing: the urge to expand, to overcome, to impose order on chaos. It is not what you do. It is what does you. Freud would later speak of the unconscious as a storehouse of repressed memories and forbidden desires. But Nietzsche saw deeper. He didn't just suggest that unconscious forces influence the self. He argued that those forces are the self. The so-called you is just the echo, the aftermath. Think about that. You think you choose your beliefs, your desires, your values? What if your values are just justifications, noble lies you tell yourself to cover the fact that your subconscious already chose the direction, and consciousness just limps along behind it, waving a flag? Nietzsche called out even the philosophers of his time for being dishonest about this. He accused them of constructing elaborate systems of thought after the fact to justify what they already felt. The will chooses, the mind rationalizes. There are no moral phenomena at all, he writes, only a moral interpretation of phenomena. You don't believe in truth because it's true. You believe in it because something in you found it useful. The same with compassion. The same with worth. These things are not universal. They are masks worn by will to power, a shapeshifter that takes the form it needs to survive and thrive. This is the part that destabilizes everything. The subconscious is not neutral. It is not a calm lake of feelings waiting to be understood. It is a battlefield, a chaos of drives and forces, each struggling for dominance. And when Nietzsche says will to power, he doesn't mean there is one single will. He means there are many, and they fight within you. You are not one. You are legion. This is why sometimes you don't recognize yourself. Why you say, I don't know why I did that. Or, that wasn't me. But it was. It was just a different you. One that won the internal war for a moment. A one that rose from the depths, took the wheel, and drove you straight into something forbidden. You are not a rational creature. You are a vessel through which instinct fights for form. The will to power isn't just in your ambition. It's in your shame, your fear, your obsessive need to control how others perceive you. It's in the subtle hierarchy of your friendships, in the carefully calculated humility of your social media posts. Every act is a signal. Every silence is a strategy. You want to win. You just call it being good. Even your repression is will to power in disguise. You do not suppress certain urges because they are wrong. You suppress them because they would cost you more power than they would gain. You've internalized the values of others, and now your inner tyrant enforces them against your own forbidden self. But what would happen if you listened to that forbidden self? Not blindly, not destructively, but utterly, without moral judgment, without fear. What if that voice, the one you silence, is the closest thing you'll ever have to truth? Nietzsche's point is not that you should obey every impulse. It's that you should know where your impulses come from and stop pretending that morality or reason created them. The subconscious is not beneath you. It is not lower. It is deeper, older. And unless you engage it, it will continue to direct your life while you play dress-up in the costume of choice. You are not who you think you are. You are the forces you do not name. You are the chaos you pretend to have tamed. You were told you are free. Free to choose. Free to change. Free to rise above your past, your instincts, your conditioning. This idea is the backbone of modern identity, modern morality, and modern guilt. You are responsible, they say, because you could have chosen otherwise. But what if that's a lie? Not just a philosophical error, but a calculated distortion, a cage disguised as freedom. Nietzsche believed that the concept of free will was not only false, it was invented to punish, a weapon forged by the weak to control the strong. And like all the best prisons, it starts in the mind. He writes, "The doctrine of the will has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment. That is, because one wanted to impute guilt." Let that sink in. Free will, your cherished sense of agency, exists not because it reflects some deep truth about human nature, but because societies, especially religious and moral systems, needed a way to blame, to make people suffer for being what they are. It's a brilliant mechanism, really. Strip a person of their connection to instinct, then convince them that their desires are evil. Tell them they are free and therefore guilty. Every time they fail to meet the standard you've imposed, now they'll punish themselves. No chains required. But Nietzsche doesn't stop there. He rips the floor out from under the entire moral apparatus. You do not choose your thoughts. You do not choose your feelings. You do not choose the deepest currents of your behavior. They emerge from you like smoke from fire, evidence of something burning far, far below the level of conscious control. Science has started to catch up. Neuroscience now suggests that decisions begin in the brain before we become consciously aware of them. Nietzsche saw it coming. He saw that the self is not a cause, but an effect. Not the puppeteer, but the puppet. And not even the only one on the strings. And yet, you still feel responsible. You still feel shame. Why? Because you were trained to. From the moment you could speak, you were rewarded for self-denial and punished for spontaneity. You were taught to internalize judgment, to separate yourself from yourself, to call one part of you good and the rest bad, and to crucify the latter in the name of the former. What we call the conscience is not a divine compass. It is an internalized tyrant, a reflection of societal pressure etched into your nervous system. Nietzsche named this bad conscience, a sickness born from the repression of natural instincts, a psychological mutation that turned the human animal against itself. When external punishment became internal guilt, we ceased to be wild and became moral. Not better, just broken in a more acceptable way. And what does morality demand? That you take responsibility for actions that arose from drives you did not choose, in circumstances you did not create, judged by values you did not invent. Responsibility in this view is a farce, and Nietzsche is merciless in revealing it. He writes in Twilight of the Idols, "The causa sui is the best self-contradiction that has been conceived so far. The desire for freedom of the will, in the metaphysical sense, is the will to be causa sui, to pull oneself up into existence by the hair, out of the swamp of nothingness. You want to be your own cause, your own origin. But you are not. You are the product of collisions, biology, history, trauma, instinct. And yet you sit in judgment of yourself, declaring war on your own becoming. What would happen if you stopped? What would happen if you dropped the illusion that you could have done otherwise and began to look at your actions, not as sins or failures, but as revelations of what lives within? This is not nihilism. This is clarity. Nietzsche isn't saying that nothing matters. He's saying that you cannot build truth on a foundation of lies. And the biggest lie of all is that you are free in the way you've been told, that your failures are moral, that your suffering is deserved. But remove the illusion of free will, and something strange happens. You don't collapse into chaos. You awaken. You stop condemning yourself for the patterns you didn't design. And in that space, where blame dies, responsibility is reborn. Not the kind imposed from outside, but the kind that emerges from within. Responsibility, not as punishment, but as power. The ability to respond honestly to what you are. But you can't do that until you see clearly. You are not a sinner. You are not a saint. You are a storm wearing a name tag. So now you know. You are not a singular self. You are not the author of your thoughts. You are not even the rightful owner of your will. Everything you've clung to, your identity, your morality, your sense of control, has been cracked open. What lies beneath is not chaos, but something stranger. a swarm of instincts, ancient drifts, ancestral voices whispering in a language your ego was never meant to understand. And yet, Nietzsche doesn't leave you in despair. In fact, this is where the recurrence begins. Become who you are. This is one of Nietzsche's most haunting commands, not a slogan of self-help, not an invitation to express yourself in the shallow, consumerist way that passes for authenticity today. No, this is something far more difficult, far more dangerous. It is a call to descend into yourself, into the unconscious, into the shadowy terrain where your real nature waits like a forgotten god. To become who you are is not to invent yourself. It is to uncover what has been buried, to strip away what is false, to face what you have denied. The task is not creation. It is excavation, and it will cost you everything that made you comfortable. Nietzsche's psychological vision was decades ahead of its time. Before Jung ever coined the idea of integration, Nietzsche was already gesturing toward the need to reconcile the conscious and unconscious mind, not through repression, but through confrontation. He knew the psyche could not be healed through denial. He saw clearly that so much of our suffering comes not from instinct, but from our war against instinct. The part of you that sabotages your relationships, that resists happiness, that erupts in shame or rage. It is not your enemy. It is the self you exiled, and it has not forgotten you. To become whole, you must enter into dialogue with that self. You must walk down into the cave of your subconscious, not to conquer, but to listen, not to tone, but to understand. What you call your dark side is not evil. It is unloved. It is the part of you that had no place in your morality, no voice in your story. Nietzsche does not promise that this journey will be pleasant. He never promises comfort, but he promises something better: truth. He gives you a psychological mirror that does not flatter, and a test to measure your soul. It is called the eternal recurrence. Imagine living your life exactly as it is, again and again, forever. Every pain, every joy, every lie, every moment of cowardice or strength, relived in an endless loop. No edits, no forgiveness, just the truth, repeated eternally. Could you endure it? More than that, could you affirm it? Nietzsche presents this thought not as a metaphysical claim, but as a psychological crucible, a way to evaluate your life, not by external success, but by internal necessity. Do you live in such a way that you could say yes to your existence, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours, wholly, honestly, fiercely yours? That is the final step of becoming, owning what you are, not in pride, not in shame, but in full radical self-recognition. You are not the mask you wear. You are not the story you were given. You are not the morality you inherited like a family heirloom. You are something deeper, wilder, more dangerous, and more alive. This is what Nietzsche offers, not the comfort of certainty, but the power of confrontation. He strips away the illusions, not to leave you empty, but to make room for the real, for the self that doesn't need justification, for the self that dares to stand unmasked. To become who you are is not a destination. It is a task, one that needs recurrence. It is the daily act of choosing awareness over denial, truth over convenience, depth over surface. It is saying yes to the whole of you, even the parts that scare you, especially those. Because in the end, Nietzsche doesn't want you to be good. He doesn't want you to be sane. He wants you to be real. And the only thing standing in your way is the person you think you are.